The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 2, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read for the first time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Peterson, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018, more commonly known as the Farm Bill. I do so proudly because I still believe that rural America and our farm and ranch families are the backbone of this country. Our farmers and ranchers ensure that Americans across this great country pay the lowest grocery bills in the world. They also hand us a rare trade surplus while creating 21 million American jobs. In the heartland, agriculture is the lifeblood of the economy. When agriculture does well, Main Street does well, and when agriculture is suffering, so is Main Street. But beyond the economic contributions, rural America and our nation's farmers and ranchers are imbued with the values that I cherish deeply, the values of faith and family, of God, country, and duty. Our neighbor helping neighbor, hard work, and personal responsibility. In short, Mr. Chairman, rural America and our nation's farmers and ranchers make America great. I expect that is why the President of the United States strongly supports this Farm Bill and urges its passage. Times are not good right now in the heartland. Our nation's farmers and ranchers are struggling in the midst of a 5-year recession with no end in sight. Net farm income has been cut in half over this period of time. As a result, rural America is not partaking in the economic recovery that urban counterparts are experiencing. There are many reasons why behind the hard times in farm and ranch country. I'll briefly discuss two. In my hometown of Midland, Texas, we've received 1 inch of rain over the last 195 days. Drought is ravaging my state. Last year, we saw record losses due to hurricanes and wildfires. And to the north, in ranking member's home state, farmers are struggling to get into the fields to plant, although it's the middle of May. The fact is, men and women who clothe and feed us in a manner that is absolutely unrivaled in the world history are the ones hit hardest and first by Mother Nature. A second reason for the current conditions is another factor totally beyond the control of our farm and ranch families, the predatory trade practices of foreign countries. For the sake of brevity, I'll offer just one example. In just 1 year, China over-subsidized just 3 crops by more than $1 billion. To put that in perspective, the entire safety net for all of our farmers and ranchers under this Farm Bill is expected to cost just 64% of the amount China spent on illegal subsidies in just 1 year, on just 3 crops. Mr. Chairman, the global market is awash with high and rising foreign subsidies, tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, and these are hurting American farmers and ranchers. So what do we do about that? We heed the call of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Agriculture to pass this Farm Bill. This Farm Bill is not a cure for all that ails rural America and our farmers and ranchers. But this Farm Bill does provide a safety net to see them through the hard times. For my colleagues interested in the budgetary impacts of this Farm Bill, H.R. 2 keeps faith with taxpayers, with CBO now projecting more than $112 billion in savings, nearly 5 times what was pledged back in 2014. There are many other aspects of this Farm Bill, but I'll just briefly touch on 3. First, Secretary Perdue has shown great leadership on 2 particular issues that are extremely important to rural America. The opioid epidemic that is ravaging rural America needs an aggressive, effective response. And the lack of broadband in many parts of rural America put farmers and ranchers and rural communities at a terrible disadvantage. The Secretary is determined to tackle these problems and has asked for the tools he needs to make it happen. This Farm Bill provides those tools. And second, it's no secret that we do not have a bipartisan Farm Bill process at this moment, and that I deeply regret. Ultimately, Democrats and Republicans chose to agree to disagree on the question of whether work-capable adults should work or get free job training for 20 hours per week in order to be eligible for SNAP. I respect my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but I do want to be clear about something. This Farm Bill in no way, shape, or form disrespects Americans who depend on SNAP. To the contrary, the Farm Bill keeps faith with SNAP beneficiaries, providing needed benefits and something more, the dignity that comes with work and the promise of a better life and a better life that jobs brings. I want these Americans to realize the American dream. Finally, in closing, I want to note that there is a cottage industry in this town that is determined to defeat this farm bill. They want this House to ignore the realities of Mother Nature and the predatory trade practices of foreign countries and turn our back on farm and ranch families struggling to hang on in the face of these hard times. Mr. Chairman, that should not happen on our watch. I urge my colleagues to stand by the hardworking families that put food on our tables and clothes on our backs and still live every day by the values that made this country truly great. Let's stand up for rural America. Let's pass this farm bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I rise today in opposition to, and I yield myself as time as I may consume. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018. H.R. 2 is not a work product that I'm proud of because it's not one that I or my Democratic colleagues had much of a role in producing. More than that, though, I'm opposed to H.R. 2 today because it's simply not good enough for American farmers, consumers, or rural advocates. H.R. 2 fails our farmers. The bill does not improve the safety net programs farmers need to manage a troubled farm economy. It fails to make needed increases in reference prices under the PLC program to address the 52% drop in national farm income. It neglects repeated requests to increase funding for trade promotion to help strengthen overseas markets in response to this administration's actions on trade and renewable fuels. H.R. 2 fails our nation's hungry. While I agree that there are changes that need to be made in the SNAP program, this is so clearly not the way to do it. The bill cuts more than $23 billion in SNAP benefits and will result in an estimated 2 million Americans unable to get help that they need. Within the nutrition title, the bill turns around and wastes billions that the majority cut from SNAP benefits to create a massive, untested workforce training bureaucracy. H.R. 2 fails our conservation goals, reducing the federal funding for our voluntary conservation programs by almost $800 million. It fails our next generation. It lacks mandatory funding for scholarships at 1890 land grants. It underfunds our programs for beginning farmers and the outreach to socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. H.R. 2 also fails our energy independence goals. Aside from eliminating the entire energy title, the bill hobbles renewable energy and energy efficiency efforts in rural communities by eliminating funding for the Rural Energy for America program. H.R. 2 fails the farmers, rural advocates, and consumers that we're here to represent on all these fronts. But what's so incredibly frustrating for me is the failure of this process. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would simply say for the record that all of the bill was negotiated, except for the SNAP title, in good faith with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Not once did they mention on many of these issues that were just brought up, but we did have an agreement on those non-SNAP titles. It was a SNAP title, quite frankly, that caused the rift. With that, I recognize my colleague from Pennsylvania, the chairman of the Nutrition Subcommittee, for 3 minutes. GT.
The gentleman is recognized.
Chairman of the Agriculture Committee and Chairman of the House here, thank you so much for yielding. And I want to thank the Chairman of the Agriculture Committee for his tireless work on this important legislation in order to support rural America and our most vulnerable. Over the past 3 years, the Agriculture Committee has spent countless hours talking with constituents, performing outreach, and holding hearings with stakeholders to see how we can improve upon the 2014 Farm Bill. And contrary to the claims of some, this legislation was not created in the dead of night or without input from my friends across the aisle. Mr. Chairman, I have before me a letter that was sent to Chairman Conaway and Ranking Member Peterson with priorities identified by the Democratic members that I'm proud to serve with on the Agriculture Committee. I'm proud to say under nutrition specifically, all of these, and I believe all these titles, these priorities were incorporated into the Farm Bill. Over this 3-year period, we held 21 hearings and heard from 81 witnesses at the Nutrition Subcommittee alone. Members of the Agriculture Committee traveled to every corner of the country to participate in listening sessions and obtain vital input from our farmers, our ranchers, and our growers. As the Farm Bill was in development at the committee, every member had the opportunity to provide input and that input was considered during this process. Yet even with an open process, no amendments were offered during the committee markup by my friends across the aisle. That's an opportunity for refinement, as is being on the House floor, an opportunity for refinement. From voluntary insurance programs to conservation and rural development programs to agriculture research, H.R. 2 contains critical supports for our nation's farmers, ranchers, and rural America. On the farm side, I'm especially pleased with the continued reforms to the dairy margin protection program, as well as the forestry provisions in Title VIII. And while I could go on about all these good policies contained in H.R. 2, this legislation ultimately is about supporting American food, both on the farm and the consumer side. Food is a national security issue, and whether we realize it or not, every American shakes hands with a farmer at least 3 times a day. As chairman of the Nutrition Subcommittee, I'm proud that we maintain nutrition assistance for our most vulnerable through the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. Approximately 65% of these dollars directly provide food to children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities who rely on benefits of SNAP when times get tough. H.R. 2 also does make historic changes to SNAP by providing new job opportunities for work-capable adults. This bill does this by reinvesting significant dollars within our budget into education and training programs. By providing the states the increased resources to do this, every work-capable SNAP recipient will be guaranteed a slot in a job training program, leading to ultimate food security. By doing this, we can help folks elect a pathway to long-term employment, self-sufficiency, and ultimately a way out of poverty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would ask that certainly support for H.R. 2. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I'm pleased to yield to the gentleman from Georgia for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, let me make it very clear at the very beginning that this is a racist farm bill. Make no mistake about it. The good Lord says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And the truth is that this is, unfortunately, a racist farm bill. Let me tell you why. After the Civil War, when the South was utterly destroyed, they established land-grant colleges. And then 30 years later, because there was so much struggle without adequate freedom for my people, African Americans, they established the 1890 land-grant colleges because they had Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but equal doctrine. Yeah, they were separated already, but never equal. These 1890 colleges have never gotten the financial support that they've needed to even come close to the white 1860s that were there. And so we tried to make amends in this farm bill to come up with a very noble idea. With the shortage of younger people not going into agriculture, not going into science and technology and research to feed the future, we established scholarships to go to the 1890s. But you know what? When they took our bill, put it into the farm bill, they took the money out, just like they did back to the 1890s. Black people in this country have suffered too long, and we need to put a stop to it. I'm here. I know that this House will not put the money back in. It was just $1 million a year for each of the 5 years to try to get people in. And these land grants knew. Every black man does not necessarily want to play football or basketball. They want to be scientists. They want to feed the future. This is a terrible bill. And I'm asking that the Senate put the $95 million back into this bill, and let's finally treat the 1890 land grant African American schools with the respect and the dignity that you've never given to them.
is authorized in the bill for discretionary spending to create the scholarship program that was just been referenced. There was no money taken out of the bill because there was never any money in the program. We simply recognized the need, and we set that program up in place as a direct result of the gentleman's passionate plea for scholarship programs. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute of time to Mr. King. There was never any money in there, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman will suspend. Order. The gentleman will suspend. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Gentleman, yield a minute to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the yielding and the work that's been put in to get this farm bill together. First thing that I'm happy about is it has the Protect Interstate Commerce language in it, which passed on committee by simply a voice vote. It's well established. It protects and preserves the Commerce Clause. We can't have states regulating interstate commerce. That violates the Commerce Clause. This restores it. That's item number one. Item number two, in Title I, we have in the bill, we protect the PLC program, we improve and protect the ARC program, and we protect the crop insurance. All of that keeps our families on the farm, and if we don't have that, market fluctuations take them off. We've also increased funding for the MAP program, market access, and for the foreign market development program. We've got another FMD program too, and that's the vaccine bank that's in this bill. Putting work into the SNAP program is an important component. All work has dignity, all work has honor, and it's a good start for what we need to do to get a lot better turnout of what goes on with our welfare programs is here. So I thank the chairman for putting this bill together here on this floor today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I am now pleased to yield to the gentlelady from Ohio, 2 minutes.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I thank you so very, very much for the fight you put up during this process. Mr. Speaker, I stand today with my Democratic colleagues fighting for the very soul of America. Inscribed on the Statue of Liberty are these words: "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." We have lost our way, Mr. Speaker. There is no longer a lamp nor a golden door. And if we fail to protect the weak, the frail, the poor, the children, seniors, and disabled, we have lost our soul. We no longer live up to the promise of America and the true meaning of our creed. Mr. Speaker, it is just cruel to American families and food producers, those who rely on the Farm Bill program, should put them at risk only to carry out a hateful, demeaning, and mean-spirited partisan agenda. It is dishonest to promote the idea that SNAP recipients are undeserving, that we are lazy. 65% of all SNAP recipients cannot work. They are children, seniors, and disabled. And most of the others do work, some of them in the very building in which we stand today. I ask my colleagues, what have poor children ever done to you? What have seniors done to you? What have this disabled ever done to you? Republicans are paying for the $2 trillion debt they created in the tax bill on the backs of the poor. It is just sad, Mr. Speaker, really, really sad. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Boss.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear from my constituents in Southern Illinois that the rural America is hurting. That's why we need the Farm Bill to address the concerns facing agriculture all over rural America. The Farm Bill does just that. The Farm Bill protects the farm safety net, including commodity programs and crop insurance, invests in rural broadband, modernizes FSA, loan programs for new and beginning farmers and ranchers, invests in conservation. President Eisenhower once said, "Farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from a cornfield." Those words hold true today. And that's why this bill was crafted with those farmers in mind, because farmers in everyone's bread, farmers are everyone's bread and butter. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman will suspend. The committee will rise to receive a message.
The House will be in order. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed to S.J. Res. 52, a joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the Federal Communications Commission relating to restoring internet freedom, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
Committee will resume its business. Its sitting.
You want to talk? He's got a minute now.
The committee will be in order. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Luan Grissom.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I came to Congress to solve problems and create economic opportunities for New Mexico, which is still struggling with one of the highest unemployment and poverty rates in the nation. Now, we had a chance in this Farm Bill to do just that, and I have worked for years on an array of bipartisan initiatives in this bill, including creating the first ever broadband grant program to increase internet access in rural communities, expediting the adoption of innovative conservation and water management technologies, and finally banning the heinous practice of lunch shaming. Unfortunately, the bill you brought to the floor today not only jeopardizes all of that bipartisan work, it also includes provisions that will cause so much pain to so many people in my state. This bill creates new restrictions on SNAP eligibility and a massive unfunded mandate on state bureaucracies, which will further destabilize an already broken SNAP system in New Mexico. I spent years working to hold my state accountable for their mismanagement of SNAP and for illegally denying thousands of individuals their benefits. Under this bill, those mistakes will become much more common. Millions of Americans will be needlessly kicked off SNAP, and more children and families will go hungry. Mr. Speaker, it may be politically expedient to bring this partisan bill to the floor that destroys SNAP as we know it, but passing a partisan bill that will undoubtedly die in the Senate does nothing for the Americans who wait for Congress to do their jobs. This bill is the perfect reflection of what is wrong with Washington, that politics always take priority over progress. I urge my colleagues to recommit to the bipartisan collaborative work that is desperately needed by farmers, ranchers, and vulnerable Americans in every single one of our districts. This is the only way we'll pass a farm bill and fulfill our commitment to the constituents. We have a duty to serve. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, America's farm families have had to weather a 5-year recession. Thirds of our farming operations today are in economic trouble, and Chapter 12 bankruptcies have risen by 33% in just 2 years. So it's no secret that our nation's farmers and ranchers are struggling. And I hear all this talk during this past month about a free market, how everything would be so much better without farm programs. We want a complete, total free market, they say. And from an intellectual and philosophical standpoint, I would love that. We all would. But here's the problem. That isn't the real world. There is no free market when you have countries all around the world subsidizing their agricultural production to the hilt. For example, Communist China agreed to a subsidy limit as part of their accession to the WTO in 2001. But what do? They exceed that subsidy limit by $100 billion on just 3 crops alone in 1 year. That's no free market. Farm programs account for 0.24% of the total federal budget. And in return, every individual and family in this country is guaranteed an abundant, affordable food supply, the very best nutritious food at an exceptionally affordable price. That is, quite frankly, a huge return on a relatively small investment, not to mention what agriculture means to our rural economies and our trade balance with the rest of the world. American agriculture is more than just being the best producers in the business and feeding the world. It's about food security and national security. Once a farm is gone, it isn't coming back. It's not like your local hardware store that goes out of business. It's not like that space isn't going to be replaced by another business. It will. Farms, on the other hand, are replaced by developments taking some of our very best farmland out of production. Mr. Chairman, if I can have 15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
We have lost 41 million acres of farmland during the past 30 years. Mr. Speaker, passage of this farm bill is absolutely critical to the livelihood and success of our farm families and food supply, and I encourage and hope that every one of us will vote for this bill. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield a minute and a half to the Chairman of the Democratic Caucus, Mr. Crowley from New York.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the gentleman for yielding me this time. We need to talk about what's really happening with this bill. Just months after giving a massive tax cut to corporations and the wealthiest individuals through their tax scam, Republicans are now penalizing the most vulnerable amongst us by cutting one of the most proven and valuable programs that ensures that kids, seniors, and working Americans don't go hungry. If my Republican colleagues looked at the facts, they'd see that SNAP or food stamps actually work. They'd see that a worker is more likely to keep a job if they can put food on the table and at the same time afford to commute to and from work. That a child is likely to do better in school if they have a full stomach to start the school day with. That calling struggling Americans complacent and lazy doesn't help America's poverty crisis. But programs like SNAP, they do help. If they could see all that, then we wouldn't be here debating a partisan bill that's bad for families, bad for farmers, and bad for our country. Mr. Chairman, the problem isn't food stamp recipients. The problem isn't food stamps. The problem is those who claim they want to help America's families, and they do everything in their power to hurt them by passing this partisan bill. I will not vote for it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Chairman. I now yield a minute to the gentleman from Florida, valued member of the committee, Mr. Yoho. 1 minute. Ted?
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only 2 times each decade do we in Congress have the privilege to effect productive, meaningful change for America's farmers and ranchers, those same citizens who feed and clothe the entire world. Let us not forget that American farmers and ranchers only make up approximately 1% of our nation's population, yet they make sure the dinner tables across the country have food on them. In fact, one farm feeds 165 people in the U.S. and abroad. As such, U.S. farm policy is now a target due to its own success. Politically driven think tanks and anti-farm groups believe that there is no longer a point to have a farm policy in the United States. They fail to realize that the American farmers and ranchers do business with foreign competitors who do not share the free market values of our country or the values that we are founded on, placing them at a disadvantage. Therefore, we have to properly equip our producers to compete with countries that directly subsidize and own the means of production. It is indeed an issue of national security.
When time has expired?
30 seconds. 15 seconds?
15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized. 15 seconds.
Support this farm bill, defeat all anti-farm amendments that hurt the American farm families only to enrich multinational soda and candy makers for more profits. And let us ensure the farmers and ranchers of this great country continue to plant seeds and raise the herds that secure our national abundance, high quality, least cost of food prices in the world, and support the bill.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to my colleague, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Nolan.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to remind my colleagues of the simple truth is that process matters. And if the process fails, the outcome fails. And that is exactly what has happened with this farm bill. Instead of following regular order as we have done in the past, and I was there to personally be a part of it and witness it, by taking this kind of legislation up through the subcommittees with open rules, giving all the members an opportunity to offer their amendments or ideas, consider them, and have the opportunity to write this bill through the subcommittees. Instead, it's come from behind closed doors for the simple purpose of partisan positioning. In fact, members of the committee weren't even allowed to see this bill for weeks leading up to the consideration, nor were stakeholders and affected parties given the opportunity to review and express their thoughts. And the result is a missed opportunity, an abandonment of a bipartisan, collaborative tradition that has worked so well for the farmers and the consumers of this country. It's a mean-spirited, it's a bad bill, the result of a failed process, and it should be defeated, Mr.
Gentleman's
Speaker.
time's expired. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Chairman, thank you. I yield now 1 minute to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Tom Emmer.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, in my home state of Minnesota, agriculture is one of the primary drivers of our economy. And right now, farmers, ranchers, and agricultural workers across the country are looking to Congress for a strong farm bill that improves the farm safety net and brings certainty to producers in uncertain times, because life on the farm isn't what it used to be. Today, farmers are suffering some of the worst rates of suicide in the country, general social isolation, downturn of the markets, low farm income, regulatory strains, and the lack of treatment options all make it hard for farmers to get the help they need. That's why I introduced the Stress Act to boost resources specifically for farmers' mental health. With the support of Chairman Conaway and the House Agricultural Committee, I'm proud to see it included in this year's Farm Bill. Our farmers who feed the world are feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders. It's time we get them the help and care they deserve. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Bustos.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Passing a farm bill that delivers a better deal to our growers could have and should have been a bipartisan process. But when Democrats arrived ready to work, the doors were shackled shut. Instead of coming together to help our producers struggling with the downturn in the agricultural economy, this hyper-partisan bill hurts everyone from pasture to plate. It cuts $23 billion from a program that feeds children, seniors, and veterans, in addition to eliminating mandatory funding for rural development programs, which are proven job creators in rural America. This bill also strips farmers who are facing tightening market conditions of crop insurance options. This harm bill is another step in the wrong direction for rural America, at a time when farmers are already feeling the pain of President Trump's impulsive trade war and Secretary Pruitt's attack on ethanol. I urge my colleagues, abandon this harm bill and work together on a farm bill that will strengthen rural America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, you inquire as to how much time is left on each side?
The gentleman from Texas has 14 3/4 minutes. The gentleman from Minnesota has 18 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge all my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018. I have the great honor of representing Georgia's 12th District, where agriculture is the #1 industry. As a member of the House Agriculture Committee, my colleagues and I have worked diligently to craft a farm bill that works for our farmers and provides them with the ability to provide a safe, secure, economic food supply to this nation. H.R. 2 improves the current farm safety net structure and offers farmers the choice between PLC and ARC for each covered commodity under Title I to combat the downturn in the farm economy. It also makes strides in getting Americans back to work by helping those on supplemental nutrition assistance. I am the son of a farmer. I spent 35 years in the business community creating jobs. The greatest joy of my life was to give folks the dignity and respect they deserve to have a good job. How could we deny folks this opportunity? This bill gives them that opportunity. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote yes for this important bill. Our farmers and our people need us. With it, I yield back.
From Minnesota is recognized.
Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee, Mr. Scott from Virginia.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there's a lot wrong with this bill, but as ranking member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce, I'm particularly concerned about its impact on students. SNAP eligibility is tied to eligibility for other vital federal programs, so the proposed cuts in SNAP eligibility will also cut access to free school meals for 265,000 children. Research has consistently shown that students struggling with hunger have lower grades, are less able to focus, are more likely to miss school. This bill would undermine the ability of hundreds of thousands of students to reach their full potential by cutting SNAP benefits for the family and reducing school benefits for the children. In the wake of a $1.5 trillion tax cut for corporations in the top 1%, it is a shameful statement of priorities when we try to pay for these tax cuts by reducing food assistance programs for low-income students. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Now my pleasure to recognize the gentlelady from Mississippi, Ms. Roby, for 1
The gentlelady is recognized.
I thank, Mr. Speaker, I thank the chairman. I rise today to offer my strongest support of H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018, commonly known as the Farm Bill. I'm proud to serve Alabama's 2nd District, where agriculture is the largest employer, responsible for more than 93,000 jobs and more than $11 billion in economic impact. So, Mr. Speaker, I know how critically important it is that Congress deliver agricultural policy that actually works for the farmers throughout Alabama and our country, and makes their important work easier, not harder. That's why I'm proud that the new Farm Bill addresses many of the challenges farmers face every day, including streamlining and reducing burdensome federal pesticide regulations, creating a program to address our nation's feral hog problem, and strengthening the existing crop insurance program. In addition to this, the new Farm Bill makes several needed improvements to our country's nutrition assistance program by implementing strict work requirements and closing loopholes that allow for abuses in the system. I'm proud that the new Farm Bill maintains vital nutrition assistance for our most vulnerable Americans when they truly need it, while making a commitment to helping these individuals improve their circumstances. I support the legislation, and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota.
Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 2 and to express my profound disappointment in the process that has led us to where we are today. As the first New Hampshire representative to serve on the Agriculture Committee in decades, I'm humbled by the responsibility to fight for New Hampshire's small family farms. When we last considered the Farm Bill in 2014, I supported the legislation because, while not perfect, that bill provided long-term certitude to our nation's farmers and represented a compromise between Republicans and Democrats. The Farm Bill has always been a bipartisan piece of legislation, but the bill we vote on this week represents a complete departure from that bipartisan process. Democrats were pushed away from the negotiation table by an extreme ideological agenda that would increase food insecurity for millions of Americans, slash mandatory spending on critical rural development and conservation programs, and lead to 265,000 children losing access to free and reduced lunch. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's now my pleasure to recognize the chair of the subcommittee on credit, Austin Scott, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge support for H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018, also known as the Farm Bill. Rural America needs our support. Farm income has fallen approximately 50% since 2013. That's one of the steepest drops since the Great Depression. The cost of production have steadily climbed while commodity prices have fallen. Unfair trade practices like the dumping of specialty crops into our markets from Mexico are hurting our U.S. producers. The digital divide caused by inadequate or lack of broadband services has held back innovation, job growth, and education in rural America. And crises like the opioid epidemic have stricken rural communities across America, just as it has our cities. Mr. Speaker, the Farm Bill addresses all of these challenges while also taking the first major step in this Congress toward the President's vision of meaningful welfare reform. This is our opportunity to provide the needed certainty and support for our farmers and producers while also providing common sense reforms that will support the President's agenda of achieving prosperity in our rural communities. Passing a strong Farm Bill on time is key to this goal. I ask that my colleagues join me in supporting this important piece of legislation and oppose those amendments that will hamper its ability to aid rural America and keep our producers feeding not only America, but the world. This bill provides certainty to one of America's largest job sectors while also standing for our conservative principles. Mr. Speaker, I ask that my colleagues join me in support of H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018, the Farm Bill.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Grijalva from Arizona.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose the Farm Bill. It would hurt low and middle income families, take breakfast and lunch from school children across this country, and fail hardworking farmers. But it also undermines one of the nation's most successful and popular conservation laws, the Endangered Species Act. By removing the requirement for EPA to consult with expert wildlife agencies on the impact of pesticides to imperiled wildlife. Pesticides are known to have been the cause of dramatic decline in many species, threat to public health, and should not be dispensed with in this legislation. The provisions in this legislation that are anti-environment, anti-public health, anti-nutrition, and anti-working families are cause for opposition, and I urge a no vote and yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, the chairman of the General Farm Committee Subcommittee, Mr. Crawford, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the chairman for his leadership on this issue. Mr. Speaker, thank you. And let me start by saying that it's not very often that we talk about agriculture in the context of national security. I believe it's next week we're going to be taking up the NDAA reauthorization, and while that's very important to our national security, I think it's equally important to consider how vital our agriculture producers are to our national security. A country that can't feed itself is a country that is not secure, and it's inviting danger and peril. And all you have to do is look around the globe and see those nations that are in that situation. Most notably in our hemisphere, Venezuela can't feed themselves. And you can see the turmoil that has ensued there as a result. But other countries around the world, and one of the big ones that we don't talk about very often, quite frankly we should, and that is China can't feed themselves. 1.4 billion people. So what we should be doing is taking every effort during this debate to thank farmers across the country for what they do when the security they provide to this nation, and recognizing that without them, the nutrition programs that we're fighting over couldn't exist. And so let's get a little different perspective, if we can, and recognize that first and foremost, we've got to have the food produced, not only to provide a level of security in this nation, but to be able to feed a 300 million plus that call this country home. Second, we have to be about trying to secure that food source and making sure that farmers are in a competitive marketplace that gives them equal opportunities to sell their commodities. And certainly the nutrition part of this is paramount. But I think most Americans across the country, and I think there's polls that bear this out, some 75% of Americans say yes, we probably should encourage folks to work and or get educated as a component of receiving nutrition benefits. And that's all we're saying. We're not trying to compromise anyone's nutrition or threaten a single calorie. And one thing I think we need to clarify too is that the Ag Committee has no jurisdiction over school nutrition programs. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Chairman, I just remind the gentleman that the nutrition program is permanently authorized, doesn't even need to be in this bill. I'm now pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today to voice my strong opposition to the 2018 Republican Farm Bill. As a member of the House Committee on Agriculture, I've participated in countless hearings about the needs of our nation's farmers and families that depend on SNAP to fight hunger. Tragically, this bill doesn't reflect any of that testimony. It's a short-sighted, partisan bill that will have a detrimental impact on communities like mine. I cannot support it. In my home county of Mecklenburg, North Carolina, more than 55,000 households depend on SNAP to eat every day. This bill would rob them of access to quality, nutritious programs. In North Carolina, it's estimated that more than 133,000 people will lose their SNAP benefits if this bill passes, including over 51,000 children. Nationwide, 2 million people would be kicked off the program, and an estimated 265,000 children would lose access to free or reduced meals at school. No eat at home, no eating at school. Adding new work requirements through an unfunded, untested mandate will bankrupt states and force more needy people out of the work program, out of the program. Colleagues, let's scrap this flawed partisan farm bill, and let's work together in regular order to draft a bill that helps America's farmers and the families who depend on nutrition assistance. Additionally, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter a letter from Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, opposing H.R. 2 because of the detrimental benefits, detrimental effects and impacts that it will have on our children and families there. I'd like to enter that into the record, and I yield back.
Members' requests to be covered by general leave. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, how much time is left for each side?
The gentleman from Texas has 9 minutes remaining.
And the other side?
The gentleman from Minnesota has 13 1/4 minutes remaining.
Reserve for this one round?
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Chairman, how much time is there on our side remaining?
13 1/4 minutes.
Okay. Now I'm pleased to yield 1 minute. Gentleman from Arizona, Mr. O'Halloran, member of the committee.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the ranking member. Mr. Speaker, I rise to express my strong opposition to H.R. 2. Some may call this a farm bill, but for my district, this is a harm bill. Unfortunately, this year's farm bill is deeply flawed. This bill lacks a significant commitment to the needs of rural communities with no guaranteed funding for the rural development title. It is unclear to me how members of the committee say they understand the need of investment in rural America, but decided to cut $517 million from rural development programs. As we work to help communities build stronger economies, we must ensure that we have a plan in place that lends a helping hand to those who need it. In Arizona, this bill will take food out of the mouths of tens of thousands of children and veterans. It is a sad day in America when we are debating a proposal that would make children go hungry. I hope for a robust debate on how we could promote rural economic development and how to improve the business climate for rural communities and work to address resource concerns by improving conservation programs like EQIP. Sadly, this bill was written in a back room and kept secret until the last possible moment.
Gentleman's time has expired.
We owe the American people something better.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield from the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, for 1 minute.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding, but also for your tremendous leadership on this bill and so many other issues. I rise in strong opposition to this disastrous farm bill. This bill cuts the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program by $23 billion, taking food out of the mouths of 2 million Americans. Over 265,000 children will lose benefits. Why in the world do congressional Republicans want more Americans to go hungry? This is immoral and it is wrong. These so-called work requirements, they won't help anyone work. They punish struggling families who are not getting enough hours at work or decent wages to help feed their families. Nutrition assistance helps 40 million people put food on the table, and more than 80% of SNAP households worked the year before or after receiving aid. And the majority of people receiving SNAP benefits are children, the disabled, and seniors. Now, when I was young, I was a single mom raising 2 little boys. I relied on food stamps to help my family during a very difficult time during my life. It was a bridge over troubled water. I want families to have this bridge over troubled water now, and I urge my colleagues to vote no. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd like to clarify the record. The 265,000 children have been mentioned a couple of times. 95% of them would, in fact, maintain access to reduced lunch prices because their families make too much money to qualify for the free lunch. But 5% of that 265 would, in fact, maintain the free lunch program as it currently existing. So just to clarify that. Now, great pleasure to recognize the Subcommittee Chairman of Horticulture, Mr. Rodney Davis, Illinois, for 2 minutes. Rodney.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a district that relies on a strong farm bill. Illinois is a leading producer of soybeans, corn, and swine. Our economy relies on a farm bill that supports agriculture. Although we all eat, I realize there are many districts whose members may not be as enthusiastic as I am about the farm bill. That's why there's something in this bill for every district. For those concerned about the deficit, I have good news. The last farm bill was the single largest cut in mandatory spending that we made in the entire 113th Congress. We build on these sound policy reforms in this bill. If you're a member who wants to address the cycle of poverty that too many of our constituents are trapped in, this bill is for you. H.R. 2 reforms the system and invests historic amounts in workforce training. Despite our growing economy, we have 9 million more people on SNAP today than we did at the height of the recession when jobs were scarce and unemployment was in the double digits. This isn't progress. This isn't helping to end the cycle of poverty. In my home state of Illinois, 67% of work-capable adults on SNAP are without work. A long recession left Americans disheartened, people dropping out of the labor force because they lost their job and after months and months of searching couldn't find another one. H.R. 2 makes investments to give many of those same people a hope in finding a job again. 4 years ago, I was a freshman, and the Farm Bill was my first opportunity to be part of a conference committee and see firsthand our democracy at work. Democrats and Republicans sparring over policy differences, but at least there was a debate. I'm incredibly disappointed by my friends on the other side of the aisle who didn't offer any amendments in committee. Work requirements are not new. They were done in 1996 by a Republican-led Congress and Democratic president during a similar time of economic growth. When do the politics end and the serious policy discussions begin? Let's put politics aside, pass this important bill for our farmers, for our taxpayers, and for too many Americans trapped in poverty. Let's show the American people we can govern together.
Yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, the leader of the Democratic caucus, Ms.
The
Pelosi.
gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I especially thank him for his exceptional leadership over the years to honor the historic collaboration that has always existed in our country between urban and rural America. That is in all of our interests that our farm countries succeed, and that it is in all of our interest that the American people are not food insecure. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your outstanding, ranking member, for your outstanding leadership on behalf of America's farmers and hungry families. Mr. Speaker, this bill is just a mystery to me because we have tried so hard over the years to work in a bipartisan way to come together to write a farm bill that does honor that historic collaboration, urban-rural, meeting the nutritional needs of the American people, encouraging the economic growth in farm country. This legislation does not do that, and I have some questions as to why. Some of the questions came to mind last week when I was on a farm in Iowa, listening to hardworking men and women talk about their challenges with this farm bill, that it does not bolster or preserve the farmer safety net, that the bill reduces investments in agricultural research, conservation, and rural development, and that it cuts nutrition assistance that so many there, even in farm country, but in our country, rely on. When I was in Iowa, as I said last week, I had the privilege of meeting a wonderful woman named Julia Slocum. Julia works 2 jobs. She is a 3rd-generation farmer and a part-time librarian. Over the years, she has relied on the lifeline of SNAP to put food on the table during difficult times. A farmer relying on SNAP to put food on the table. I challenge House Republicans to explain to Julia why they're abandoning hardworking people like her, abandoning her twice by gutting the farmer safety net and by cutting SNAP. This bad bill steals food off the tables of children, seniors, students. 1.5 million of our veterans rely on this food nutrition, the nutrition provision of this bill. 23,000. Imagine, it's not just our veterans. That would be reason alone to be concerned, 1.5 million. But of our 23,000 active duty service members, 23,000 of the families of active duty servicemen need to have food stamps because they are food insecure and they are hurt by this legislation. Individuals with disabilities, working families, our seniors, students, children. Democrats have always supported work initiatives for those who can work. But let's be clear, this is not a jobs bill. SNAP returns money to farmers, to our economy, and to the Treasury, creating $1.79 for every dollar in benefits and supporting more than 560,000 jobs across the country, including 50,000 in agriculture. Republicans are contending that they are investing in jobs. They're not investing in jobs. They're creating a bureaucracy and ignoring initiatives already in place to measure what really works in relating food to jobs. But they are wasting, and you are wasting billions on new bureaucracies that would take decades to implement and that would increase hunger and poverty across the country. It's no wonder that so many faith-based groups across the country view this bill as one that does not reflect the values of America. Again and again, Republicans try to ransack the lifelines of working families to pay for handouts and to enrich the already wealthy. This bill abandons America's farmers where they are in a tough spot. The farm economy is struggling. As you know, farm prices are plummeting. More and more families are in danger of losing the farm. And that was before the Trump tariffs invited retaliation from China. Yet Republicans are creating a self-inflicted crisis farming communities can't afford and they can't control. I challenge House Republicans to explain to farmers and ranchers why they propose a bill that weakens the farmer's safety net when we should be protecting family farmers, soybean, corn, wheat, pork, and specialty crop growers from self-inflicted damage of Trump's trade brinkmanship. Explain why this bill slashes hundreds of millions from rural development initiatives, cuts small business loan guarantees, and adds new layers of bureaucracy to high-speed broadband grants when we should be investing in self-sufficiency for small towns. Explain, my Republican colleagues, why this bill eliminates funding for on-farm energy initiatives and biofuels, when we should be embracing the American farmer's role in making America sustainable and energy independent. Explain, my colleagues, why this bill creates new loopholes for millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires to receive farm subsidies when we should be investing in the next generation of farmers and ranchers. For the sake of our children, families, hardworking Americans such as Julia, for our veterans, for our servicemen and women, for our Americans with disabilities, we must return to the table and craft a balanced, robust, bipartisan farm bill, as we have done in the past and the distinguished chairman of the Ag Committee knows is possible. We must return to the historic, decades-long bipartisan solution that weds our farmers and our hungry families together. Republicans must put aside politics and honor our responsibilities to 16 men and women of agriculture and the nearly 41 million Americans who are food insecure. That is why I urge a no on this dangerous bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Continue reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Chairman, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've told you, it is an absolute honor to serve on the Agricultural Committee under the leadership of the chairman as well as the ranking member. There's no doubt about that. But I mainly say that based on the work that this committee does. The work that this committee does to serve those in agriculture and what that service can do for the backbone industry of our country. However, as a representative on this committee and as a representative of the salad bowl of the world on the Central Coast of California, my country, and yes, my community, expected more out of this farm bill. Look, in my area with its flourishing specialty crop industry, we wanted more funding for the Specialty Crop Research Initiative. Because of our specialty crops, we have a labor shortage because of the people that are needed to pick those crops. Therefore, we needed stronger language in the bill for mechanization to help with our labor issues and to bridge that gap from the Salinas Valley into the Silicon Valley. With our burgeoning organic industry, we needed more funding and less cuts for the organic certification cost share program so that we can properly invest in beginning producers. And in addition to this, the majority is trying to implement an untested and unproven change to Title IV, the SNAP provision. Such a change threatens to remove over 1 million people from the program, and it deeply affects the 74,000 people who are recipients of SNAP living and working in my community. We can do better by our farmers. We can do better by the families across our country by getting back to our bipartisan roots. That's how we help our agriculture. That's how we help our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Term reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, good to recognize the gentleman from Iowa, David Young, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018. Included in this great bill are two bills I introduced, the Water Act and the Stress Act, which was introduced with other colleagues as well. Now, the Water Act improves water quality by easing access to the Conservation Innovation Grant Program and reducing red tape. Iowans expect and deserve clean water, and this bill will help do that. The Stress Act will help address the farmer suicide crisis gripping our nation. By opening the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network, farmers facing tough times can get the help that they need. Our farmers feed, fuel, sustain the world, and it's only right we take steps to help them. I was also pleased, and I thank the chairman, that in the farm bills there's positive steps to address the food waste that is out there in our country. Our country wastes 40% of our food supply, and as a co-founder of the Food Waste Caucus, I'm committed to reducing food waste to combat hunger, as well are many of my other colleagues. I want to thank the Chairman Conway for his leadership as well by putting in the bill, the Food Loss and Waste Reduction Liaison at the USDA, so we can take another step to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas reserves with 5.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized with 9 1/4 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, could I inquire how much time we have on our side?
9 1/4 minutes for the gentleman from Minnesota, 5.5 minutes for the gentleman from Texas.
I'm now pleased to yield to the gentlelady from Delaware, Ms. Blunt Rochester, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is with deep disappointment that I stand in opposition to the partisan Farm Bill. I joined the House Committee on Agriculture because of its reputation of being bipartisan. I represent an entire state, urban, rural, and suburban. The Farm Bill is vital. That is why I was so disappointed to see this breakdown. The goal of creating a thriving economy and moving people out of poverty is a goal we all share. And throughout my career, I've worked to connect people with jobs. As Delaware's former Secretary of Labor and Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services, I've overseen both workforce development and economic safety net programs. I believe in work. We believe in work. However, the majority's proposal would essentially force individuals off SNAP to pay for an unproven, untested, severely underfunded program. What happens if your child gets sick or your car breaks down? Should that mean you and your child go hungry for up to a year if you're sanctioned? What makes this even more troubling is that the 10 pilot programs designed to give us best practices in providing employment and training services to SNAP recipients, one of which is in my home state of Delaware, have not been completed or evaluated and won't be until at least 2019. Why are we putting the cart before the horse?
If the majority is really concerned with getting the policy right, why not wait until we have the evidence and the data to make good use of taxpayer dollars? To understand the impact on Delaware, I traveled across my state and met with farmers, emergency food providers, supermarket owners, and state agencies. But the conversation that surprised me the most was one I had recently with a father. He shared how years ago, SNAP and public housing allowed he and his wife to raise 3 healthy daughters. Because of support, he was the first in his family to graduate from high school and college, and ultimately to move out of poverty. He paid that debt back in multiple ways through service. He went on to become a social worker, a school administrator, and subsequently elected city council president. The value of service was then passed down. One daughter went to work in the White House and is now a professor of social work at Rutgers University. The second daughter became an engineer and worked for the U.S. Army protecting our troops. And his oldest daughter grew up to be a congresswoman. That dad is my dad. Colleagues, we still have a chance to go back to the drawing board. The hopes, the dreams, the aspirations of 42 million people are in our hands. Let's not let them down. I yield back.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Reserve, Chairman.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
I reserve. I don't have any speakers right at the moment. Are you ready to close? Or?
I've got one more speaker.
Okay.
You done? All right.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, pleasure to recognize the former chairman of the committee, Frank Lucas, for 2 minutes. Frank?
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's hard to believe, my friends, but almost 5 years ago, Colin, Mike, we were on the floor of this very chamber when we took up the previous farm bill, a farm bill that was well-crafted and well-intended. And on that day, if you remember, folks of good principle on both extremes of the perspective together managed to bring the bill down. Now, why do I bring that up? Because I simply want to remind all my colleagues, no farm bill is ever simple. They're all hard. Circumstances change from cycle to cycle, crop to crop, but it's always hard to do a farm bill. So why are we here? Why do we keep going through this process? Because ultimately we need to pass a comprehensive piece of legislation that will make sure we have the ability to raise the food and fiber that our neighbors need, that we can sell into the world markets to meet their needs. And yes, that we provide the ability through this same piece of legislation so that our neighbors, who through tough times, through most often circumstances beyond their control, have the ability to access enough of that food to meet their needs. So yes, we have to have a farm bill. We have to have a farm bill. I would say to all my colleagues, this is a step in the long march to ultimately creating a final document that involves the other body and requires a signature by the chief executive of this country. Let's debate and argue and fight out amendments tonight and tomorrow and the next day. Let's avoid what happened 5 years ago by doing things that would try to kill the process. Let's keep the process moving forward. Let's refine. Let's perfect. Let's pass a comprehensive farm bill so the people who feed and clothe us have the ability to do it. So those who need help in receiving the resources they need have the ability to do it. We have no less option. Good faith, do what you need to do, but let's get it done. There are people depending on us everywhere and around the world too.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself the balance of our time.
Gentleman's reserved. Recognized.
And Mr. Chairman, as I spoke earlier on the drawbacks of H.R. 2, I mentioned before that before I reserved, that I'm very frustrated by the breakdown in this process that got us to where we are. Now, Mr. Lucas is right. We do have to have a farm bill. But let's understand what we need to do that actually is required. Title I needs a farm bill. Title II needs a farm bill. Other titles need a farm bill because they're only authorized for 5 years. SNAP is permanently authorized. If we didn't do anything, SNAP would go on like it is. Crop insurance is permanently authorized. If we didn't do anything, crop insurance would go on just like it is. So the part of the bill that we're worried about are these other parts that will expire on the end of September 30th. Now, what happens if we don't get it done? We go back to permanent law. And some of my constituents think that's a good idea because it goes back to 100% of parity. And most people in America probably don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about 100% of parity, but a lot of the old timers in my district know very much what that is. And, you know, it's $9 corn. They'd love to have $9 corn. So the permanent law is not an option. So we need to get something done. But my point is that we don't need to do some of the things that we're doing in these areas that are not required to do anything because they're permanently authorized. So as I speak today, you know, I refuse to give legitimacy to what has been, in my view, an illegitimate process. The chairman said we tried to work on a bipartisan basis. We didn't raise any issues at the time because he said he didn't have any money and we were going along with the system. And that's till we got into the situation where this SNAP stuff came forward, you know, and I told you this was not going to fly in our caucus. And you can see over here the feelings that you've engendered with this proposal, you know, and it is breaking apart what we have had here in this country for a long time. I've been here for 4 farm bills. I've been here as a member, as a chairman, as a ranking member. And as Frank said, each of these bills has had their share of headaches. And they've all, at the end of the day, though, had more common ground than opposition. And in the end, the Ag Committee has always produced a product that we could be proud of because we knew we delivered the best deal possible given the circumstances that we were dealing with. We have always been able to work together for the mutual benefit of farmers, rural advocates, and consumers. Prior to my time here, Senator Dole and McGovern carried the mantle. Hubert Humphrey from my state and George Aiken before that. These weren't ideologues, but they weren't pushovers either. Each knew where their party stood. Each also knew the value of making sure the link between people who grow the food and the people who buy food and make sure that that link was strong. So let me be as clear as I can be. In my opinion, breaking up that coalition, ruining a partnership that predates all of us, is a huge mistake. More than that, this closed and one-sided nature of this process that we've been through is something that I have to call out. It does not bode well for farm and food legislation to come. No party can do this alone. It's too big of a job. So as ranking member on the House Ag Committee, I want you to know that I am willing to come back to the table, but only when the majority has the ability to sit down and figure this out together. I was told on this SNAP stuff by the chairman that he could not negotiate it. It was non-negotiable. That's what got us into this problem. So when we get to the point where we can actually start talking about negotiation, I'm willing to come back to the table and try to get back to a bipartisan situation. So if folks want to do welfare reform, I was there in '96, so I was part of the deal at that time. But it should be done as a comprehensive review of all of the programs, not just the Farm Bill. And I just think it's a huge mistake for us to be trying to tell people that somehow or another putting work requirements and these other things into the Farm Bill is going to overhaul the welfare system. That's just not true. Most people don't get enough money out of the food stamp program to make much difference one way or the other. It is not food stamps that are causing people to be on welfare. It is not food stamps that are causing people not to work. You know, and that's my big objection to this. It's just ideology run amok. And it is screwing up the process here. And I hope that we don't do so much damage that we can't pull this back together at the end of the day and get this done. So I'm going to vote against H.R. 2, and I urge all of my colleagues to do as well, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize myself for the remaining time. Mr. Speaker, I too am saddened, or Mr. Chairman, I too am saddened by the loss of the bipartisan work that we typically have done on this committee. I've bragged about being one of the few bipartisan committees in Congress back home a lot, and it is saddened. Just as the ranking member just said that his side refused to negotiate any changes to SNAP, I simply said work requirements, strengthening the work requirements is going to have to be a part of what we do. And so that was where we are with respect to that. What I heard over and over and over again on the other side is that the non-SNAP portions of the Farm Bill, while maybe less than they would like to have, are nevertheless essential and vital. And so I'm looking forward to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle working as diligently as they can to defeat all of those poison pill amendments that will have to be offered over the next several days so that we can maintain that safety net for production agriculture that they need, deserve, without a legislative history of a loss on this floor that is totally unnecessary. So I'm hopeful that my colleagues over there will be a part of that. Mr. Speaker, the entire state of California is under a work waiver. So that no one in California has to work to be able to stay on those food stamps. That doesn't make any sense to me when you've got a unemployment rate of 4% across this country. So something has to change in that regard. What I've heard over and over, not only today but throughout this debate, is folks from the other side is they are full-throated in favor of work requirements. Couldn't be more supportive of work requirements. Just not these. Over and over and over, they're full out in favor. We've got a legislative history of all of my colleagues on the other side talking about how important it is for job training, for education, for getting folks the skills and tools they need to be able to have meaningful work. Just not these. Got it. My ranking member had a letter from his folks said not to negotiate on SNAP. I took him at his word on that regard. It's disappointing that we're reached this point. But we're at this point. We now have a bill before us that does make meaningful reforms to the work requirements under food stamps. It does not touch the working poor. Folks who are willing to work 20 hours a week, no matter how long they're in that circumstances, we're going to be shoulder to shoulder with them to try to get them the support they need. We're also trying to create a state-based, state-run program in which the federal government, federal taxpayer pays for the work that the states to do on job training. There's no better spot to locate that than there, because we cannot create a one-size-fits-all training program here in the United States House of Representatives. I trust our states to be able to do that. Those states have the capacity, they have the bandwidth to make that happen. Comments to the contrary are really misplaced. So as we move forward through the rest of the debate, I would encourage my colleagues to join me in opposing all of those poison pill amendments that are going to be presented that would harm the non-SNAP portion of the Farm Bill, support the work that we've done, so as my good colleague from Oklahoma just said, continue to move this process forward, understand what the Senate gets done, move to conference, and move a bill to the President's desk by September 30, so that farmers and ranchers across this country who we're the most keen to support and have that certainty of what the next 5-year support system looks like. Right, wrong, or different, they deserve that kind of assurance, that kind of confidence that they'll have the farm program to back them up, and their bankers are important in that regard as well. So asking my colleagues to support H.R. 2, to fend off those poison pill amendments. And with that, Mr. Speaker, Chairman, I yield back.
All time for general debate has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I ask that the committee now rise. I move that the committee now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2 and has come to no resolution thereon.